Okay, I think we can start. Good evening, everyone. Uh, Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm very honored to chair this meeting that celebrates a seminal work that I will present in a moment and will provide some biographical notes about its author. My name is Ilan Pappé. I'm the director of the European Center for Palestine Studies and a professor in the Institute of the Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. With me today is my dear colleague and director of the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies, Professor Christina Phillips, associate professor in Arabic and comparative literature, whose research interests are Arabic and Arab Anglophone writing, comparative literature, religion and literature, translation studies, and eco-criticism. The recent book, Religion in the Egyptian Novel, Themes and Approaches, was published by Edinburgh University Press. And she currently is working on a new monograph on literature and environment in Israel and Palestine. Christina, Professor Phillips, also published a number of translations from Arabic, including Nobel Prize for Literature winner Naji Al Ali's Morning and Evening Talk, and other books by known Arab writers. Our main guest is Professor Tahrir Hamdi. Tahrir Hamdi is a professor of anti-colonial and resistant literature, and she's the president of the Arab Open University of Jordan. Professor Hamdi recently won the International Palestine Book Award of 2023 in the counter-current category for her book Imagining Palestine, Cultures of Exile and National Identity, which is the book we will discuss today. In 2020, Professor Hamdi won the Abdel Hamid Schuman Foundation's Arab Researchers Award in the humanities. She has also published research articles in reputable international journals such as Race and Class, Interventions, the International Journal of Postcolonial Studies, Journal of Postcolonial Writing, and the Arab Studies Quarterly, which was founded by Edward Said in 1979. Professor Hamdi is an associate editor in the new journal, Janus Unbound, and is also assistant editor in the journal Arab Studies Quarterly, which I mentioned. She also is on the editorial board of the Journal of Holy Land and Palestine Studies, published by Edinburgh University Press. Professor Hamdi has co-edited a new book on Ghassan Kanafani's political writing that came out in 2024, published by Pluto Press. Her research work revolves around resistant literature, anti-colonial theory, and the importance of place and space in literature. She published articles on Edward Said, William Butler Yeats, Mahmoud Darwish, Mourid Barghouti, Saadi Youssef, Ghassan Kanafani, Naji Al Ali, Palestine, Ireland, and Iraq. Her current research interests include the complexities of space, historical, temporal, geographical, and imaginative within the anti-colonial and resistance spheres. Let me very briefly introduce the topic of today, which is informed by her book, Imagining Palestine. I think many of you are familiar with the adage that the pen is mightier than the sword. Of course, in resistance, the sword is still deemed necessary by many, and the pen has been replaced by the keyboard. But viewed historically, resistance through writing was done by pens, pencils, and typewriters, and even by graffitis on wall, cartoons, songs, poems, plays, and novels. While nowadays the internet offers even more inventive ways of expression. All these audio, verbal, and visual expression of the pen are part and parcel of the Palestinian resistance since its very inception. But never before have they been articulated as a theory of resistance, one that helps to unpack the Palestinian experience in a way that feeds back into our understanding of other cultural struggles, other current struggles by indigenous people, life seekers, workers, and anyone else who is victimized by the economic, political, and moral order determined by the global north. Such a theorization is offered to us by Tahrir Hamdi in her moving and thought-provoking book. This is first and foremost a book on cultural resistance, and this book, Imagining Palestine, is one of the most comprehensive representation of Palestinian cultural resistance, the analysis of which transcends the case study of Palestine and touches other people in the world still struggling against old and new settler colonial projects who only lately discovered how relevant Palestine is for them and how cultural intersectional struggle may now be at a crucial part of the way forward in the future. Tahrir Hamdi, however, does not employ a deductive approach, namely applying the abstraction and theorization of cultural resistance to the Palestine case study. This is an inductive research, where the case study leads the more general discussion. This is a welcome approach, which I recommend to my postgraduate students who like to remain in the comfort zone of deductive analysis. The uniqueness and exceptional realities in Palestine, in particular the imbalance between Israelis and Palestinians, create an anomaly which is Palestine, full of paradoxes and the dichotomies that indeed call for a theory of Palestine alongside and not instead of more conventional approaches to its history and present conditions. Between framing the Palestinians as terrorists and Islamists to viewing them exclusively as victims, most of the people who know them, their history, their struggle, and determination cannot but admire this nation without idealization, but just on pure common human and universal values. This book teaches us something else about the Palestinians. Notwithstanding their constant victimization by the Israelis, they do not see themselves as victims, but as people who still hope to win the battle for freedom and justice. Through the works of Palestinian literati, poets, writers, cartoonists, and cultural activists, the agency and resilience of the Palestinian shines through this book. This is not an attempt to idealize a group of very normal people, but rather show how humane is the Palestinian struggle for normality. And there is good chance that this basic but noble human impulses will all direct Palestine in the post-colonial era when it arrives. In more than one way, this book chronicles the story of the Palestinian cultural resistance and at the same time becomes part of this resistance. With this, I will end my introduction and give the floor to my colleague, Professor Christina Phillips. Tina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ilan. Thank you for that. And thank you to ECPS for facilitating this event, and a big welcome from me as well to you, Tahrir. And also thank you for writing such an important book. I thought maybe I could, walk you through some questions to kind of introduce the audience with more of your work. I wanted to start with the kind of big one of what does it mean to imagine Palestine?
Okay, thank you, Tina. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ilan, for those powerful words. And thank you for your kindness as well. Your essay on imagining Palestine is really a work on its own. So it's a great, great essay. Thank you for inviting me. Well, what does it mean to imagine Palestine? That's a good question. Imagining Palestine for me, when I set out to write the book, it was something, to be honest, something that I lived with all my life. As a child, even, I was always imagining Palestine. I grew up in Chicago. I was born in Amman, but my parents, when we were very young, had to move to Chicago. And this is where I learned about Palestine, believe it or not. From my parents, of course, their storytelling. But this idea of imagining Palestine lived within me, lived within us, I can say. What is it? For me, it is a conscious act of resistance. The very idea of imagining Palestine is a conscious act of resistance and defiance, which involves the constant process of reconfigurations, reformulations of Palestinian national culture and cultural and collective identity, Why do I say that? Because I do believe, as Darwish and Said and so many thinkers believe, that identity is not just one pure thing. It's collective. It should be unitary. So it is a construction process. Now, why do I say conscious? It's a conscious act. Conscious in the sense that it has intent. It's intentional, as in Said's terminology of intention and method. It has agency. It's empowering. Also, if you like, think of the words origins and beginnings. Origins are given to you, beginnings are made. So actually what I meant is we are doing something real. We are creating something real on the ground. It is not abstract. It is worldly. It is real. It's about real events. It's about real life. Now, some very important key words in the idea of imagining Palestine is, of course, resistance and defiance, liberation and return. Now, when we say return, I'm going to repeat the words of the Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti, who, when I interviewed him, said, Tahrir, return, return of the millions. Now, why did he say that? And he writes that in his memoir, I Saw Ramallah, because I asked him why I saw Ramallah. He said, look, my publisher wanted me to say return to Ramallah, but I did not return to Ramallah. I merely saw Ramallah. Return entails the return of the millions. And that would create a totally different situation. But also imagining Palestine is possibly most importantly for me, it is a discourse that counters the discourse of defeat and defeatism and surrender. And I'm going to use Ghassan Kanafani's word in an interview with an Australian journalist. It is to counter capitulation, surrender. What do I mean by defeat and defeatism? What is that? Defeat, for me, is thinking that there's nothing that can be done about it. This is the status quo. This is the way things are. And I don't believe in that. That would mean to surrender. And of course, Arab officialdom, let me just use that terminology so as not to get too specific. Arab officialdom has surrendered. The PA, that's the Palestinian Authority, has surrendered. So what I mean by imagining Palestine, yes, we are resisting the very brutal ideology of Zionism, but at the same time, resisting the kind of defeatism that so many, Arabs believe in. It is also a discourse based on sumud. In my book, I call it Palestinian sumud. What does the word sumud mean? Sumud means steadfastness. It means resilience. And possibly the best example of sumud, and this is not something I have in my book because this happened during the Gaza genocide. And my book was written, of course, before the Gaza genocide and the October attacks. So the best example of sumud and steadfastness and resilience is after the ceasefire was announced in Gaza, you saw, I don't know if you saw these videos, you had a million people on foot walking back to the north. To what? To their homes? No homes left, just rubble. No hospitals, no schools, no universities, nothing. They were walking back. And you know what they were doing? I saw them, I heard them. They were singing and they were happy, okay? So the idea of sumud, my God, I mean, total and utter devastation. But these people are so resilient. Now, if I were to think about imagining Palestine a little bit more philosophically, I let me use Theodore Adorno's idea of the consummate negativity, where he says the consummate negativity delineates the mirror image of its opposite. So what is the consummate negativity? Here, the brutality of the Zionist state, the brutality of Zionist ideology. What does it delineate? It delineates the most ferocious, if you like, ferocious form of resistance and defiance there is. And this is something you see in Gaza, in the people of Gaza, and in their resilience. Now, you know, and Ilan knows much more than me historically, but you know, the idea of expulsion and ethnic cleansing and let me say, expulsion, ethnic cleansing, genocide. Of course, it didn't start now. It didn't start in 2023. Historically, you know, Theodor Herzl, the father of Zionism, who lived until the year 1904, believed that in order to realize the Zionist dream, Zionists needed to, and I'm quoting the words, spirit the penniless population across the border. Who are the penniless population? The indigenous Palestinians. They were to be spirited across the border. So the idea is that not that there weren't any people living there. It was, of course, not a land without a people for a people without a land. But it's just that those people were worthless. They didn't mean much. So as you can see, the idea of even dehumanizing Palestinians was there from the very, very beginning. Okay, why, you know, the dehumanization was there in 1948, before 1948, and even now. The same kind of dehumanization I see in Western media. The Israeli hostages have been released. So the BBC, Guardian, Independent, all Western media and CNN, okay, you know their names. Of course, the hostages could be Israeli soldiers who were right there on the border. And soldiers, you know what they do. They snipe at Palestinians, but they are hostages. Whereas all Palestinians, even if it's a 13-year-old kid who was detained for throwing a stone, is a prisoner. And Palestinians are not humanized in the way that Israelis are, okay? So the dehumanization of Palestinians continues. Why dehumanize? Because that's what the colonizer does. The colonizer dehumanizes to make the elimination of these people acceptable. So for me then, as I said, imagining Palestine is resistance, is defiance, and of course, the idea of liberation and return is there as well. I can go on and talk about how resistance literature came, you know, but I think you're, you know, Ghassan Kanafani, I write about Ghassan Kanafani. So I guess I'll stop there for now and see if you
Well, actually, I mean, that was actually, thank you, Tahrir. That was actually my next question. I was going to ask you, you know, that you've given a wide-ranging kind of explanation of resistance in its many forms, and I wanted to ask you about the kind of particular role of literature, poetry, and art in resistance. And of course, yes, Ghassan Kanafani would be a kind of seminal thinker in this respect.
well, why the role of literature, art, and poetry in Palestinian resistance. It's to construct an archive of resistance. You know, Edward Said once said that nobody really told the story of Palestine. He meant in literature. And of course, Ghassan Kanafani was assassinated at a young age. He was 35, and he was assassinated in 1972 by the Israeli Mossad. So, but he did leave us with a lot of important work. Literature is there to create an archive of resistance. It is there, it's important, its role is very important in giving Palestinian culture, literature, even history, an afterlife. What do I mean by an afterlife? Now, with journalism, okay, journalism is important, but journalism disappears after a while, okay? Whereas literature remains. Ghassan Kanafani's work remains. This little guy on my mug, I don't know if you can see him. This is Handala. Do you see Handala? Now, when you see this little guy printed on shirts and mugs and keys, and you ask, who is Handala? Why is he there? Handala is a 10-year-old refugee child who is in tattered clothes and is barefooted, and you can see his hair is in spikes, and and Handala represents his creator, because Naji Al Ali was an artist and a very sharp critic, okay? When his family was expelled from their village called Shajara in 1948 Palestine, Naji was 10 years old. He was the age of Handala. Now, why does Handala have his back turned like that? Because he is upset with the world. He is upset with the Arabs. He is upset with humanity that allowed for the ethnic cleansing and the expulsion of the Palestinians to happen in 1948. And little did Naji Al Ali know, and little does Handala know, that the same thing is happening over and over and over again. And still the world lets it happen. And I heard Ilan Pappé once argue that in one of his recent videos, that what happened in Gaza in 2023 to 2025 is even worse than the Nakba, or on a grander scale, okay? And this is true. We don't know how many people were killed in Gaza. Gaza is still under siege, okay? But what I'm saying is, why is literature, art, and poetry important? Because it keeps these stories, these ideas, this resistance alive for us. This literature has an afterlife. It lives after its writer, author, creator dies. That's why we're still reading Ghassan Kanafani, and we're still learning about the massive amount of cartoons that all tell a story that Naji Al Ali drew. So, and Ghassan Kanafani also said that the writer, the artist, the novelist is a combatant. He's a fighter. And the literature that he writes is a fighting literature. And these are ideas that are very similar to the ideas of Frantz Fanon. In Arabic, it's al-adib al-muqatil. So the actual writer is a fighter, and maybe his words are even more powerful than bullets. So yeah, so literature creates for us this kind of steeliness, the kind of resistance that is needed to resist the consummate negativity, the absolute brutality of Zionist ideology. Something interesting about Handala, and I connected in my book to several things, is the idea of bitterness. Handala, the character, comes from the Arabic word al-handal. Handal is a very bitter plant, okay? But out of bitterness, what do you get? The absolute opposite, and that is creativity and life. And I can even connect that to other things. I remember when Mourid Barghouti visited me and I was supposed to interview him for the journal Arab Studies Quarterly. I asked him if he wanted to, drink coffee or tea. He said coffee in Arabic, qahwa. And I said, okay, how do you like it? Sugar? He said, alqam. Alqam in Arabic means bitter. It doesn't mean without sugar. It means bitter, okay? So the idea of bitterness, I'm like, I'm running up against the theme of bitterness wherever. It's a bitter experience. The Palestinian experience and history is bitter. But at the same time, what was born out of that bitterness was not surrender. It was creativity. It was life. And I would also connect it to my own brother's work. And I write about him in my book. My brother passed away, of course, as I say in my book, in the year 2020. He was young. He was a scientist. He had a PhD in biochemistry. Big, big mind. My brother, because when we grew up in Chicago, our parents always told us about Palestine and olive trees and how olive trees, was dominant and just dotted the Palestinian landscape. So when he got into science, he was, he always wondered about the olive tree. Okay. And he always wondered why the olive tree does not die. The leaves on the olive leaves do not really wither. Okay. So there must be something in those leaves that give life. And he did. As a scientist, he studied the Palestinian olive tree with the olive leaves, and he wrote about the compound oloprin. And he always told me, I'll never forget this, Tahrir, the key is in the bitterness of this compound. And he would say, here, taste it. And it really is a very bitter compound. He says it's an anti-cancer agent. And he patented it as an anti-cancer agent. And to be honest with you, many people were cured, especially people with solid tumors. So look, out of the idea of bitterness, you have creativity, you have life, you have science, and you have an afterlife. Their work lives after them. So literature is crucial. It is critical. I don't know if I answered that question.
No, yeah, you certainly did. Thank you. And you write very movingly about your brother in the book. And also one of the things that one of the kind of interesting and original kind of approaches in your book for me was that you expand the resistance, the cultural resistance beyond literature to take in other forms, dance, the medical research of your brother, olive planting, and et cetera, et cetera. So that was a very kind of enlightening part of the book for me. I'm going to kind of throw in a bit of a theoretical academic question, well, academia kind of considering question. Palestine studies, there's a kind of, or I think you refer to it as a kind of ethical scandal in your book, but the way that that Palestine has been omitted from post-colonial studies and post-colonial approaches for such a long time, and there's a kind of deep irony there when Edward Said, one of the founding thinkers in the field, was himself Palestinian. And I wondered if you bring this out quite very, very interestingly in your book, how Edward Said kind of came perhaps a little bit late to Palestine. And I wondered if you kind of, could talk to the audience a little bit about this, because Edward Said is obviously of great interest to many of us here. We've all worked on him, but you've introduced us to interesting things in your book.
Yeah, I thought it was very strange, to be honest, that so many thinkers and post-colonial critics and writers look at Edward Said as the father of post-colonial theory. He never used the term post-colonial, by the way. Edward Said never used the word post-colonial, and he never, said that I'm the father of anything. But he did interrogate Orientalist discourse, which is a very colonialist discourse. So he interrogated colonial discourses, but he was labeled by so many as the father of post-colonial theory. And then post-colonial theory for quite a long time, just totally disregarded Palestine. Palestine was never discussed. We were talking about so many things, theoretical, abstract, hybridity, and, so many aspects of post the colonial, okay? But when you think about it, well, let's go back a little bit. Let's back up. Edward Said, and I'm not trying to emphasize a nativist point of view or nativism or the purity of identity in any way. I'm totally against any kind of essentializations in that sense, okay? But it has a lot also to do with experience, okay? Edward Said is a Palestinian, okay? And what led him to question colonial discourses has a lot to do with his own experience as a Palestinian, his out of placeness, his living in exile all of the time. And I would, let's say something very similar about Ghassan Kanafani. The American critic Barbara Harlow, in her book Resistance Literature, said, the first person to use the word resistance literature is Ghassan Kanafani. Ghassan Kanafani is a Palestinian, okay? So these people were writing about resistance, cultural resistance, and resistance in all its forms, including armed resistance, especially Ghassan Kanafani. And of course, Edward Said never excluded armed resistance. He said it in Culture and Imperialism, and he said it in interviews. He said, I'm not a pacifist. But the irony, as you said, it was ironic. Yes, the irony is that the people who, in the 20th century at least, were, established a kind of discourse or founded a kind of very anti-colonial and resistant discourses were Palestinians. So isn't it ironic that Palestine was sort of erased from existence? It is, as Patrick Williams says, a scandal, okay? Because according to Patrick Williams, and I do of course agree with him, it is the most brutal and examples, Zionism and Israel and the plight of Palestine is the most brutal form of colonialism that we have in the world today. So how could it be ignored? Why was it ignored? And was this kind of pushing Palestine out of the story? Is it intentional? So yeah, if you think about even Edward Said's ideas, theoretical ideas, all of them relate to anti-colonial discourse. Intention and Method was a very early book. Beginnings, in that book, he talks about beginnings, which are empowering because they are made, they're not given to you. He talks about worldliness in a different book. Worldliness, because let's talk about the world of events, the Nakba, the ongoing Nakba, for example. Affiliation versus affiliation. That's filiation with an F versus affiliation. And Ghassan Kanafani also talks about the same thing. Exile, both physical exile, metaphorical exile. The oppositional intellectual for Said is somebody who stands for the oppressed and who lives on the margins of society. And he stands, of course, with the oppressed. In my book, I concentrate on late style. Late style is, for Edward Said, as he explains it, because he was, of course, suffering from leukemia. So he was, let's say, suffering, but at the same time, he wasn't surrendering to his disease. He was fighting it out. And this is how he saw Palestine. Late style is a discourse of resistance. It is a discourse of combat. So it is about not surrendering. It is about not giving up. Yeah, so it does, you know, with Edward Said, I thought something very interesting in his book, Out of Place. Although he was born to Palestinian parents, he said, I wasn't Palestinian affiliatively from the very beginning because his parents never discussed it. He became Palestinian. It's a kind of becoming, it's a kind of revolutionary becoming. So it was like a journey for him. But I mean, his ideas are still relevant today. The only thing I would say for late style, he talked about it within the context of old age and illness. You know, for somebody, he said, to be able to reach that kind of late style resistance, you know, it has to be like somebody's getting really old or really sick. But I would say with our Palestinian the young generation, the new generation, now, their experience and their resilience, they've already, they're already there. They practice late style resistance. And I think there's a lot of hope in that, a lot of hope for the future, for liberation. Yeah.
Just as you were speaking, I was wondering about Darwish on that as well, because obviously he was, well, he passed away early with his illness, and I suppose there was some kind of thinking through of that whilst he was still producing art and theory on it. I wanted to, I will kind of let Ilan come back in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you about, I was very pleased to see Radwa Ashour and Susan Abulhawa included in your case studies, and I wanted to ask how you think that gender shapes kind of resistance in cultural expression.
Okay, before I get to gender, because you mentioned Darwish, and Darwish, by the way, is very important in his way of imagining Palestine because it has a lot to do with construction. In one of the poems, he says, I'm not embarrassed of my identity. It is still under construction. And for him, identity is very important. But what I wanted to do right now for Darwish, then I'll go to the gender question. You know, it's sometimes you think of poets, you say, my God, they're prophets. He has a poem called Silence for Gaza, which was published in the early 70s. If you just listen to the last part of this poem, you would think that he's talking about now. So if you just allow me a few minutes to read the last part of Silence for Gaza from Mahmoud Darwish. What is beautiful about Gaza is that our voices do not reach it. Nothing distracts it. Nothing takes its fist away from the enemy's face. Not the forms of the Palestinian state we will establish, whether on the eastern side of the moon or the western side of Mars, when it is explored. Gaza is devoted to rejection, hunger and rejection, thirst and rejection, displacement and rejection, torture and rejection, siege and rejection, death and rejection. Enemies might triumph over Gaza. The storming sea might triumph over an island. They might chop down all its trees. They might break its bones. They might implant tanks on the insides of its children and women. They might throw it into the sea, sand, or blood. But it will not repeat lies and say yes to invaders. It will continue to explode. It is neither death nor suicide. It is Gaza's way of declaring that it deserves to live. It will continue to explode. It is neither death nor suicide. It is Gaza's way of declaring that it deserves to live. So, when I just read those lines, I'm like, of course, he died in the year 2008. It's like he's talking about today, the kind of defiance and resilience that we see in Gaza. Ghassan Kanafani is the same. He has a short story called Letter from Gaza. And maybe if I have time at the end, I can read a part from there. But going back to your gender question, Radwa Ashour has a book called A Woman from Tanura. Tanura, of course, is one of the 1948 villages where there was a massacre, and Ilan talks about it in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Of course, there were other massacres, but the idea of women and Palestinian culture, women, especially grandmothers in Palestinian culture, they're storytellers. My grandmother was a storyteller. My mother now for my children is a storyteller. They tell stories. You can say they're the ones who preserve our culture. But what struck me about Radwa Ashour's novel, she's, of course, an Egyptian novelist. She was married to the Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti, and their son is the Palestinian poet Tamim al-Barghouti, so a very talented family. In the book, her character Ruqayya, when she was, I think, 12 years old in 1948, and she saw the massacre. She was a witness to the massacre, and she just, saw bodies, piled up bodies. So for her, it was a very difficult memory. And even in the novel, when you read the novel, you feel that what Radwa Ashour is trying to say, that there's a difficulty of representation. Even representing what Ruqayya saw is difficult. And as a woman, she's supposed to be silenced in a man's world. But what really touched me very most about, the idea of gender and silence, and how silence speaks in this novel. And not only does it speak, but it speaks very loudly and in a very resistant way. Right in the middle of her novel, Radwa Ashour does something really, strange. She leaves a blank page, just totally blank, right in the middle of the novel. No titles, nothing. Why? Because she's narrating basically Palestinian history, which includes a lot of massacres. She was a witness to the Sabra and Shatila massacre in 1982 in Lebanon, in Beirut. So what she saw them do, because there were thousands of people were massacred. They were like putting white shrouds at the time over dead bodies. So in the novel, she couldn't narrate. Nothing would come out of her mouth. The novel is called Flies because that's all her memory can remember, the flies all over the dead bodies. So she puts this blank page right in the middle to imitate the white shrouds over the dead bodies of the massacred in Sabra and Shatila. But for me, what it did for me when I was reading, when I came to that page, the blank page, empty page, I stopped. I just stopped. It gave me shivers. It just felt like Radwa was telling us, stop there, think about what you just saw, think about what you just read. And it's like she's asking her readers to stop, think, and maybe say a prayer, the Fatiha, to read the Fatiha. So her way, her style reminded me of Toni Morrison in Beloved. Again, a woman, a very powerful woman writer. And in her novel, Toni Morrison does something similar. She uses a language that patriarchy, white patriarchy, would not understand. And I feel that Radwa Ashour is doing the same. She's using a language, silence, that patriarchy, white patriarchy, Zionist patriarchy, and Arab possibly patriarchy would not understand. So for me, that's a very powerful message, trying to find different ways to represent and representation, the difficulty of representation as a woman. Yes.
That is very powerful. I agree. I would really love you to read the letter from Gaza section that you mentioned before we kind of
Yeah.
and then following that, I guess it's very significant that the book was published in 2023 before October the 7th, and so perhaps kind of after we've done this, reflect a little bit on where the research would go from now, or kind of the time since.
A letter from Gaza. It was published, believe it or not, in the year 1956. So we're saying a few years after the Nakba. It's about two young men, basically, and there's a girl in there, a young girl named Nadia. They're from Gaza, these young men. One of them, his name is Mustafa. And Mustafa went to Sacramento, California to study at a university. And he found like a good university for the narrator of this letter, of the story by Ghassan Kanafani, to study, and he's telling the narrator to come to California. But the narrator, who used to work in Kuwait, came back to Gaza and found out that his niece Nadia had thrown her body over her young brothers and sisters in order to save them from Israeli bombing. But unfortunately, her leg was amputated from the top of the thigh. And he was very hurt by that because she asked him for trousers before the amputation. And when you think of even the theme of amputation, look at, how many children in Gaza who have been, have amputated limbs now, living in Gaza right now. So amputation as a theme, as a geographical theme, amputation, how the people of Palestine were amputated from their ancestral land, as a bodily theme, bodily amputation, and even, psychological amputation as well. Well, anyway, let me just read. The narrator is talking, and this is the end of the story. My friend, never shall I forget Nadia's leg, amputated from the top of the thigh. No, nor shall I forget the grief which had molded her face and merged into its traits forever. I went out of the hospital in Gaza that day, my hand clutched in silent derision on the 2 pounds I had brought with me to give Nadia. The blazing sun filled the streets with the color of blood. And Gaza was brand new, Mustafa. You and I never saw it like this. The stone piled up at the beginning of the Shuja'iyya quarter where we lived had a meaning, and they seemed to have been put there for no other reason but to explain it. This Gaza, in which we had lived and with whose good people we had spent 7 years of defeat, was something new. It seemed to me just a beginning. I don't know why I thought it was just a beginning. I imagined that the main street that I walked along on the way back home was only the beginning of a long, long road leading to Safad. Safad, of course, is 1948 Palestine. Everything in this Gaza throbbed with sadness, which was not confined to weeping. It was a challenge. More than that, it was something like reclamation of the amputated leg. I went out into the streets of Gaza streets filled with blinding sunlight. They told me that Nadia had lost her leg when she threw herself on the top of her little brothers and sisters to protect them from the bombs and flames that had fastened their claws into the house. Nadia could have saved herself. She could have run away, rescued her leg, but she didn't. Why? No, my friend, I won't come to Sacramento, and I've no regrets, no. Nor will I finish what we began together in childhood. This obscure feeling that you had as you left Gaza, this small feeling must grow into a giant deep within you. It must expand. You must seek it in order to find yourself here among the ugly debris of defeat. I won't come to you, but you return to us. Come back to learn from Nadia's leg, amputated from the top of the thigh, what life is and what existence is worth. Come back, my friend. We are all waiting for you. I think this is a message from Kanafani to humanity, not to Mustafa, his friend. It's to us, it's to you, it's to the world. You know, Mahmoud Darwish once said something I think very important and about, you know, what it means to be human, to be humane, to know what is right and to take action. He said, from this day on, he who does not become Palestinian in his heart will never understand his true moral identity. You know, when the people were protesting all over the world for Palestine, when I heard them say things like, you know, slogans like, in our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians, I felt like it's almost like they were in dialogue with Darwish. He's not talking about being Palestinian in blood, of course. He's talking about being human, humane. Literature is powerful. It tells stories that journalism can't tell, especially legacy media and official state media, which are there just to manufacture consent. And actually, in the West, it's to dehumanize Palestine and the Palestinians. And in the Arab world, state media, official state media, manufactures consent in a way to divide people into sects, you know, just to, why? Because Arab media is controlled by the West. They're not free. So you get, I don't want to mention any, you know, media, any broadcaster now because, you know, but, you know, sometimes when I watch Arab media, I'm saying, what are they doing? They are dividing people into Shia, Sunna, Alawi, Druze, Kurd, Arab, Christian, you know, why the sectarian discourse? This is a kind of manufacturing consent, as Noam Chomsky has often argued. And it's just there because, you know, imperialism, colonialism controls by dividing. And Arab media does what its masters in the West, in the intelligence centers in the West, want them to do. And pretty much that's what they're doing right now. And that's what's happening right now. So we need a counter discourse. And that counter discourse is the kind of, you know, literature that I was reading, this literature of resistance, very powerful. And yes, it does have an afterlife. By the way, just to give you an example of why literature is so important, both Ghassan Kanafani and Naji Al Ali were assassinated. There's a very interesting article that was published by Victoria Britton. The title of it is something like Assassination Against Liberation. So notice that here we are assassinating thinkers, writers are being assassinated, artists. Naji Al Ali drew. Ghassan Kanafani never carried a gun, but both were assassinated. Ghassan Kanafani was assassinated in 1972 by the Israeli Mossad in Beirut. And Naji Al Ali was assassinated in 1987, I think, in London, a silencer right in his face by a double agent, the PA and the Mossad. So notice, of course, other people were assassinated. But like in Gaza, if you remember the poet and professor, young man, I interviewed him in my book as well. His name is Rifat al-Arair. He was, of course, there was a genocide. There's people were being, killed, children, babies, men, women, everything. But people like Rifat, for example, were targeted. University presidents, scientists were targeted. With Rifat al-Arair, the professor of English, they actually called him, and the Israeli army called him and said, we know where you are and we're coming for you. And they killed him. Okay, I'm sure you've heard of his poem, If I Must Die. Yeah.
Mm.
So Rifat, sometimes I go back and I read what Rifat wrote to me in Imagining Palestine, my book, and I think, wow, even though this was before the genocide in Gaza, Rifat knew that there would be a massive genocide in Gaza. He told me. He said, Tahrir, they're not after the armed resistance. It's not that they're only after the armed resistance. No, they want to exterminate Palestinians. They want to get rid of Palestinians, people. And he gave me examples. And I think what he said was very, very true.
I guess it's also a kind of testimony to the power of literature that we're still, reading Ghassan Kanafani, and we're still, and Darwish's poems will live for a long time.
Yeah. By the way, Tina, this book that I edited with Lewis Breheny, an Irish academic, we were supposed to have like 2 book talks in London. Both of them were canceled at different times. And even the last one, when it was canceled, the book talk was canceled. People went out in the streets of London and protested, and they were carrying the book and protesting at the same time. So even, the idea of canceling, silencing, dehumanizing is part of the whole, agenda, I think.
And testimony to the power of books. Well, your book was, of course, very powerful. I'm going to thank you and bring Ilan back in.
Yeah.
You're in mute.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for this very moving and powerful dialogue that you had, and thank you, Tahrir, for illuminating so many aspects of the cultural resistance and also the solidarity with the cultural resistance by people who are not Palestinians. I was thinking about the olive tree and your late brother. In my book, The Ethnic Cleansing, I have a description of the olive trees coming back where they were destroyed by the Israelis after a village was destroyed, and on its ruins the Israelis planted European pine trees, which were alien to the environment, and very soon after the plantation they caught a disease and just could not acclimatize to Palestine, and the olive trees came back without anyone cultivating them, which I thought was a powerful metaphor for what happens if you try to totally erase a country, its culture, its identity, and it gives you hope that actually this is not a possible project. It's a very brutal one, and a lot of people suffer from it. But I think what your book and other works like this, and the works that you are analyzing in the book, show really almost give the ultimate proof to what resilience means. Because so many people keep asking, how come the Palestinians are still there after 120 years of colonialism? And an international global alliance that supports this idea of making them invisible and expunge them from both history and their own country, and they're still there. And I think people underestimate the human capital that Palestine always had. And that human capital was, after the Nakba, distributed, so to speak, all over the Arab world. There's so many Arab countries that own the development of their educational system, their culture, their media, to the Palestinian refugees that had been expelled from Palestine. And you only hope that this capital would be invested once, this human capital would be invested once more in a future Palestine. I was sorry, I heard about the cancellation of the two events. This is happening all over the place, unfortunately. And we can always see it as a very frightening and disturbing development, but maybe also something positive in it. The fear from the word, the fear from culture, the fear from a poem or a poet means that they are significant, apparently. They are significant in maintaining the struggle, in maintaining survival, in showing the way, different ways of resistance and resilience. And given the imbalances on the ground, even the regional imbalances, I think that gives us hope for the future. I don't know how much time we have, Tina. I don't want to take time from actually the audience. I want it to be more interactive. So maybe I will stop here and I will chip in if the question is relevant to something that I could contribute. Thank you.
Thanks, Ilan. And if people in the audience wish to post a question into the Q&A, we have a few minutes left. But I do have one question to bring to you, Tahrir, from Sami, who asks, does Imagining Palestine offer a new framework for understanding Palestinian resistance, or does it reinforce existing frameworks?
Well, it doesn't reinforce existing frameworks. I mean, my approach as Ilan very perceptively, I think probably it was Ilan who was very perceptive in understanding that, I wasn't just applying theories. I was trying to construct a theory of resistance. I was actually theorizing Palestine, but I was looking at it as it is. Okay, I looked at Palestinian sumud and tried to understand that, how, people, as Ilan just mentioned, how people were able to remain on, and to, like, when you see the people in Gaza, and not only are they remaining, but they're resilient. They're singing about Gaza and the beauty of Gaza, and you look around, they're just these are people you have to theorize about. So I was starting from the bottom and building my, my way up. So I am constructing sort of a theory of Palestine. I think Palestine has so much to teach the world. I myself, because I do not live in Gaza and I have not experienced that kind of, destruction and devastation, I don't understand sometimes their resilience. Okay, sometimes when I'm sick, I'm like, oh, are you feeling sorry for yourself? What should they say? Okay, but they're happy. They're sitting, I'm not saying they're happy. Please don't misunderstand. But I'm saying that they are living through it. They're sticking it out. They're doing, this is sumud. This is the very definition of sumud. I don't mean that I mean to normalize their suffering, not at all. But they can live, they can exist. So it's something that we need to theorize, I think. I try to find, different ideas here and there that would explain to me what is happening on the ground in Palestine. But still, I think that theory is not, quick enough. Like Layla Khalid, for example, I talked to Layla Khalid in my book. Layla Khalid was practicing feminism on the ground without theorizing it, while white feminists in the West were theorizing feminism and empowerment and emancipation. There was Layla Khalid. There was Layla Khalid and people like Layla, not just her. My own mother participated in passing out leaflets, for resistance in refugee camps. My father, for example, was one of the founders of the Arab nationalist movement in the 1950s. His name was Khalil Hamdi. They were theory in motion. They were practicing resistance without there being a theory, to apply. They were just practicing it. My father, my mother, even the people, the theorists that I talk about. So no, I'm not sticking to any framework. I'm trying to construct a theory of Palestine. Now, when Ghassan Kanafani at the end of the story says, come back and learn from Nadia's leg. Yes, from Nadia's amputated leg. Come and learn. We have a lot to learn from Gaza. Gaza and Palestine itself, Palestinian Sumud, I think needs to become a theory in and of itself. So it's sort of like deconstructing the theory that there is and constructing a theory from the from the bottom up.
Thanks, Tahrir. There's a couple. I just have to let you know. There's in the chat. There's many thanks to you for your your words and wisdom. I'm going to give you one more question from an audience. From Felicia says, how can we connect these practices of imagining Palestine to actual real future making? So kind of how do you bridge the art and the reality?
Anything you can do. Teaching Palestine is one. I mean, if you're a teacher, if you're an instructor, talking about Palestine, posting about Palestine, publishing about Palestine. I remember a story between Edward Said and Gayatri Spivak, and I think Spivak is the one who told the story. Said didn't like Spivak's abstract theorizations, and he was very critical of that. And, she wanted to get on his good side, and she asked him, so Edward, what should I do? He said, talk about Palestine. Come with me to this conference next week about Palestine and talk about Palestine. And she said, that's what I did. So what can you do in order to imagine Palestine? Anything that you can do within the context of your situation, your circumstances would be good. Teaching Palestine would go into imagining Palestine. Reading resistance literature, reading Kanafani, Darwish, Barghouti, Ashour, different writers. June Jordan is an African-American poet who visited Sabra and Shatila, and she wrote amazing poetry about Palestine, about the suffering of Palestine. And I believe one of the poems she ended that we have to, have to make it back home, where there is space. We need living room. And she was using, words that meant like there's an amputated geography and amputated people that need to return, that need to be liberated, that need to be free. So any little thing that you can contribute in whatever career you have would be a part of imagining Palestine for me.
Thank you. I think, the call to talk about Palestine is a good place for us to end. Ilan, you began, so I will hand over to you to
Yeah.
close.
I think I will end with a quote from Robin Kelly about imagination and resistance. I think it summarizes very well everything we talked about, and with this I will end. Without new visions, we don't know how to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rude, restless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. Unless we have space to imagine and a vision of what it means fully to realize our humanity, all the protests and demonstration in the world won't bring about our liberation. And I think that Robin Kelly, those who don't know, is an African-American professor and an activist in the Black movement for many, many, many years. And from him, I learned the importance of imagination as the best antidote for moments of depression as an activist for Palestine, because there are many moments where you are losing hope and faith, and imagination keeps you alive. And if it, and through Tahrir's book, I was so happy to see how much this kind of reliance on imagination was such a powerful enhancer for the various people that Tahrir writes about in moments where humanity disappointed them, like they disappointed little Handala. And yet the fact that we can still imagine is something nobody can take from us, means that we have also a future with less disappointment, hopefully, and reassert our belief in humanity. And Palestine is such an important case study for humanity to show its moments of grace rather than a shameful face, as we all sometimes do in history. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Tahrir, first of all, thank you for taking the time and the space. Tina, thank you so much for being the interlocutor and giving us your own input. I want to thank Rama and Arij and all the team behind this organization. Thank you so much for your hard work. Do follow the European Center for Palestine Studies next events. We are doing more and more as much as we can. And God bless you, and Ramadan Kareem to those who are fasting. And hopefully we will meet in better times. I'm sure we will. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ilan. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Rama, Naima, everybody. It was a pleasure being with you. Thank you for giving me this platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good night and
Good
goodbye.
night. Good
Thank
night.
you.